going to start lines and systems of equations. Okay, turn it off. Phones should be off and put away. If I have to start taking them away, we will. All right, the definition of parallel lines. Two lines that never intersect. So they never run into each other. They can go on and on and on forever, and they will never cross. How do we know that they're parallel? Algebraically, their slopes are the same. Perpendicular lines. These are two lines that intersect at a 90-degree angle. You know what a 90-degree angle is? It's a right angle, right? All right. So, perpendicular lines algebraically, how do we know if, guys, Kaylin, go sit at your seat. Algebraically, we know that their slopes are negative reciprocals. They wrote it right here big for us. So what are negative reciprocals? So we know what a reciprocal is, right? When we're talking fractions, reciprocals, what do we do with the fraction? We flip it. So when we divide, we multiply by the reciprocal. We change, right? Or change, flip. So some examples, negative reciprocals. So what's the opposite of negative 3/4 is negative 3/4, but we have to flip it. So it becomes negative 4/3. In order to flip 2, we have to think of 2 as a fraction over 1. So reciprocal wise, we would flip it to 1/2, and then we have to take the opposite of it for a negative reciprocal. How would we do number 3? What would be the negative reciprocal of negative 7/8? So if it was negative, it would become positive. And if we were flipping it, what would go to the top? 8 over 7. One's a little different because if we have 1 over 1, either way, it's going to be 1, right? Regardless of how we flip it. So 1 and negative 1 are negative reciprocals of each other. So that isn't a very good example. It just looks like we're taking the opposite of it, but that's the only one that's like that. Everything else you have to flip. Oh, here's a good example. What about 0? What do you know about the graph of a line with a slope of 0? It's zero fun, right? It's horizontal. So if this is 0 and we're thinking that negative reciprocals are perpendicular, what would the slope of this line be? Think of slope guy. He walks to the end of the cliff and yells that horrible curse word, undefined. So here we have undefined. So this would be like a y equals a number, and this equation would be an x equals a number when we're talking about linear equations there. Okay? So that is all for page 1. Page 2 has us practicing whether these are parallel, perpendicular, or neither lines. Sometimes we call neither intersecting lines because they intersect, but they don't intersect at a perpendicular angle, at a 90-degree angle. All right, here it's the reciprocal and it's the opposite reciprocal, or the negative reciprocal. So we're calling this one perpendicular. Perpendicular. It's good spelling practice for you. Here, these are exactly the same. What do we call two lines with exactly the same slope? Parallel, right? So if it's helpful, we can make a couple notes here, right? If they're the same, here, we can call it negative or opposite. Opposite reciprocal. Oh, sorry. I only have one hand here. It's supposed to be a P. We'll abbreviate reciprocal because I don't have enough room. All right. Here, they are the opposite, but they're not the reciprocal. So this one we're going to call neither. Here, they're the reciprocal, but not the opposite. So this one we're also going to call neither. Remember, it has to be both in order for it to be perpendicular. They have to be the same in order for it to be parallel. So number 5, again, this looks like number 4, where they're reciprocals, but not the opposite reciprocals. So again, this is neither. Same thing for number 6. It looks just like number 4. They're reciprocals, but not the opposite reciprocals. They have to be both to be perpendicular. Same thing for number 7. That looks like 5 and looks like 5, I guess. So these are not the opposite as well. But number 8, these are the opposite and it's flipped. So we can indeed call this one perpendicular. 5 and 5, those numbers are the same. So we can call those two lines with those slopes parallel. And these are just the opposite, not reciprocal. So these are neither. Do you see how that works? Does that make sense? Hopefully that's pretty straightforward. All right, so now we're kind of putting in what we already know using the slope formula. Remember, our slope formula is y2 minus y1 is equal to, divided by x2 minus x1. So change in y divided by change in x gives us our slope. So if we're looking at our slope of the line segment AB, we're using these 2 points. So again, if you need to, you can label these x1, y1, x2, y2, and you're always going to put in y2, 6, minus y1, 3, all over x2, 2, minus x1, negative 2. So this is going to give us this slope. 6 minus 3 is 3. Keep, change. This becomes 4. So the slope of AB is 3/4. Now remember, parallel means they're the same. Perpendicular means they're opposite reciprocals. And neither means they're not the same or opposite reciprocals. So we're looking for either 3/4 or -4/3 in either for it to be parallel or perpendicular. So let's see what we get when we find the slope of line segment CD, or line CD, I guess it is. So I have 3 minus 0 divided by 3 minus a -1. So we have a 3 on top, a 4 on the bottom. These are the same. So we have to determine that these two lines are parallel. So our answer here is parallel. All right, so this adds in a step. So you will continue on like that. We'll practice these together because then I think you have 2 pages of your own, but I'm having a hard time turning the page here. Yes. We'll do the rest of this together and then you will try the next 2 pages. So we're going to say 4 minus 2. This is the slope of AB. So 4 minus 2 all over 5 minus 0. So we have 2/5. The slope of CD is equal to 3 minus 8 all over 3 minus 1. So hopefully you've gotten really good at the slope formula. 3 minus 1 is 2. These are the opposite and they're reciprocal, so we're calling these 2 lines perpendicular. And we're hopping right to the next one. The slope of AB is equal to 6 minus 8 all over 2 minus a -1. So we have -2 on top, 3 on the bottom. Then we're looking at the slope of CD. So 3 minus 2 on top, right? Yep. And 3 minus -1 on the bottom. So this is 1 over 4. These aren't the same or the opposite or reciprocal, so these are neither, these 2 lines. Based on their slopes, that's how we know, okay? So then we're finding the slope of this AB to be our change in y, 4 minus 3, divided by our change in x, -1 minus 2. So 1 over -3, so -1/3 here. Here, our slope of CD is 6 minus 3 and -4 minus a -5. So these become 3 over 1, which is +3. So these are reciprocals and the opposite. So we would call this perpendicular. You see how we're just putting what we know together with what we know about parallel and perpendicular lines? So again, our slope of AB, change in y, 7 minus a -2. 0 minus 0. When we have a 0 on the bottom, this is undefined. When we have a 0 on top, like we're going to have here, because we have a change in y of 0, that's going to be 0. And this was one of our examples. So -5 minus a -5, That's going to be 0 on top. So we know that's going to be 0. You can write out 6 minus 3 if you want here. But we know from our example that 0 and undefined are negative reciprocals. So this is also perpendicular, like number 4. All right. Now you're just going to keep trucking. You got to know how to find those slopes. The slope of this AB line is change in y, so 6 minus 7 over change in x, negative 2 minus a negative 4. 6 minus 7 is negative 1. Negative 2 plus 4 is 2. We've got negative 1/2. So if you're just thinking, okay, if the next one's parallel, the slope would be the same. So it would be negative 1/2. If it's perpendicular, it would be 2. If it's not negative 1/2 or 2, then we would have neither. So just to get you thinking about what would make the most sense or what we're looking for. Change in y, so 3 minus a negative 2 all over negative 8 minus 2. So the bottom is getting more negative. The top is getting more positive, but look, 5 divided by negative 10, we simplified this, it also equals negative 1/2, right? 5 is half of 10. We divide both by 5, we have 1 over 2, and it's negative, so these two have the same slope, so they are parallel. All right, so 2 more. Our slope of AB is our change in y, so negative 4 minus 1 all over our change in x, 3 minus 3. We know that anything divided by 0 is undefined here. Then our slope of CD, that's getting away from me. We have 5. This is also going to be undefined because our change in x is 0. So 5 minus 1 on top, but negative 4 minus a negative 4, or negative 4 plus 4, that's going to be also undefined. So if our slopes are the same, they're both undefined. These are vertical lines that would be parallel to each other. They'll never run into each other. Here, our slope of AB, 2 minus 8 divided by 3 minus a negative 3. 3 minus a negative 3. So this is negative 6 on top, is that right? Divided by positive 6. So this is negative 1. So this is the one that's a little bit different. If it's negative 1, if this line's slope is negative 1, they would be the same in parallel. But if it's positive 1, then they would be perpendicular. If it's not negative 1 or positive 1, it will be neither. So our slope of CD, negative 1 minus 1 on top. That's our change in y. And then 5 minus 7. So I don't think this is going to be 1 or negative 1. Because this is negative 2. Bless you. Oh, maybe it is. And this is also negative 2. So this is positive 1, right? So these two lines would be they're not the same. So they're not parallel. So they are perpendicular. All right. So you have 2 pages to practice. Remember, page 4 is just like your page 2 that we did together. And page 5, you have to find the slopes, okay? So when you're looking at page 4, If they're the same, like number 1, they're parallel. If they are opposite and reciprocals, they're perpendicular, like number 2. If they're not both or the same, then like number 3 would be neither. So we just did the first 3. Parallel, perpendicular, neither. So this one would be neither because they are reciprocals but not the opposite. And this next one, they're the opposite but not reciprocal, so they would be neither. But when they're the same, we have to know that they are parallel. All right, so I'm gonna let you finish off page 4. Page 5, again, you're finding the slopes. That's exactly what these last two are asking too. They're just written differently. So you're still finding the slope of AB and the slope of CD for both these last two. It's just written a little bit differently. So change in y, 5 minus 3, divided by change in x, 1 minus a negative 1. So be careful there. It's good practice with your slope formula. When you're done there, make sure you are working on more ALEKS or work from the last couple weeks. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.